This morning we will be in Ezra chapter 4. Ezra chapter 4, the entire chapter, and that is where we will spend most of our time. Tried to include chapter 5 in this, but there's just so much going on within chapter 4, and thought it best and pertinent to just end on chapter 4. Well, starting in verse 1, says, "Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were building a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of fathers' houses and said to them, 'Let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do. And we have been sacrificing to him ever since the days of Eshteron, king of Assyria, who brought us here.' But Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the rest of the heads of fathers' houses in Israel said to them, 'You have nothing to do with us in building a house to our God, but we alone will build to the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us.' Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah, made them afraid to build, and bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. In the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem." Now, we'll explain a little bit later on about what's happening here, because it's kind of confusing and it's a little difficult to keep along, because what's actually going on is it's the author here in Ezra chapter 4 is breaking it down into three separate events. If you want to follow the chronology or the succession of time, the way that the letter is originally written or the way that the letter has been going, you would have the first few verses of that. Okay, so Judah is rebuilding, and you have these inhabitants that have been here since the destruction that Assyria caused, and now they're rising up and they say that they want to help. And when they don't receive the thumbs up for that help, now they want to go and accuse them of being immoral, and they want to stop this construction going on. But then the author brings up two other situations where this happened as well. So it's not the same thing, and it compresses a lot of time together. There's a cluster of time here that's mentioned, because you have all these king names that's mentioned. You have Xerxes, and then later we'll have Artaxerxes, and then Darius and Cyrus, and well, that isn't all within the same time span. That's not all. They're all not ruling together. This is a long time, and it's being compressed by the author. And we'll get into it a little bit here, but verse 6 is really the breaking point for that, or at least it's the last verse according to the succession of time that we've been going by. In the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. In the days of Artaxerxes, Bishlam and Midrath and Tabeel and the rest of their associates wrote to Artaxerxes, king of Persia. A letter was written in Aramaic and translated. Rehum the commander and Sheshaim the scribe wrote a letter against Jerusalem to Artaxerxes the king as follows. Rehum the commander, Sheshaim the scribe, and the rest of their associates, the judges, the governors, the officials, the Persians, the men of Erech, the Babylonians, the men of Susa, that is the Elamites, and the rest of the nations whom the great and noble old snapper deported and settled in the cities of Samaria and the rest of the province beyond the river. This is a copy of the letter that they sent. To Artaxerxes the king, your servants, the men of the province beyond the river, send greeting. And now be it known to the king that the Jews who came up from you to us have gone to Jerusalem. They are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They are finishing the walls and repairing the foundations. Now be it known to the king that if this city is rebuilt and the walls finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, or toll, and the royal revenue will be impaired. Now because we eat the salt of the palace, and it is not fitting for us to witness the king's dishonor, therefore we send and inform the king. In order that search may be made in the book of the records of your fathers, you will find in the book of the records and learn that this city is a rebellious city, hurtful to kings and provinces, and that sedition was stirred up in it from of old. That was why the city was laid waste. We make known to the king that if this city is rebuilt and its walls finished, You will then have no possession in the province beyond the river. They say, you don't want this kingdom rebuilt. You don't want this city to come back up. It's been nothing but trouble. Just search in the books of old and you'll see how much trouble they've been. Probably referring to the animosity maybe from several nations that they've received. Then verse 17, the king sent an answer to Rehum, the commander, and Shishai, the scribe, and the rest of their associates who live in Samaria, and the rest of the province beyond the river, greeting. And now the letter that you sent to us has been plainly read before me. And I made a decree, and search has been made, and has been found that this city from of old has risen against kings, and that rebellion and sedition have been made. And mighty kings have been over Jerusalem, who ruled over the whole province beyond the river, to whom tribute, custom, and toll were paid. Therefore, make a decree that these men be made to cease, and that the city be not rebuilt until a decree is made by me. And take care not to be slack in this matter. Why should damage grow to the hurt of the king? Then when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rehum and Shishai the scribe and their associates, they went in haste to the Jews at Jerusalem, and by force and power made them cease. Then the work on the house of God that is in Jerusalem stopped. Remember that the foundation was just laid. And it ceased until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. We would be greatly mistaken if we were to tell someone that's thinking about being a Christian, thinking about making that step, making that commitment, that doing so will bring nothing but joy and peace and happiness and blessing to their life. Because consider the words of Christ, that actually it seems as though their life will be more difficult. Matthew chapter 10, verse 34, do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against his mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Or consider the words of the Apostle Paul, the disciples in Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, when he tells them that it is through many trials, through many tribulations, that we must enter the kingdom. If you were to take the message that is mainly preached today compared with the message that Jesus mainly preached, and that the apostles mainly preached, there's this dissonance between them. There's this varying degree of difference. That being that what we try to preach is we try to ease people into the kingdom, and then the disciples here in their day, in the day of the disciples, in the day of Jesus, were told that you must consider the cost. That I'm not here to bring peace, but actually a sword. That I will set family against family, believer against unbeliever. Whether you want it or not, this is what's going to happen. Separation is going to happen. Animosity is going to rise up. That is the message that we have failed to give today in the 21st century. We have evidence of here that during the construction of the saints, of the temple, the people of Jerusalem hit a wall of animosity. They received trouble from some adversaries that want to cease their rebuilding. Now, where do these people come from? They just kind of appeared out of nowhere. Well, they've been there for a while. And in fact, 2 Kings chapter 17 tells us a little bit more about these people that have been here for a while. At least after Assyria has destroyed, ransacked, brought to their knees the northern kingdom, Israel. 2 Kings 17, verse 24, said the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Judith, Ava, Hamath, and Seraphim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the people of Israel. So after Assyria has taken victory over Israel, the northern kingdom, the king of Assyria has brought people from all over and placed them here. They took possession of Samaria and lived in its cities. At the beginning of their dwelling there, they did not fear the Lord. Therefore the Lord sent lions among them, which killed some of them. So the king of Assyria was told, the nations that you have carried away and placed in the cities of Samaria do not know the law of the God of the land. Therefore he has sent lions among them, and behold, they are killing them, because they do not know the law of the God of the land. Then the king of Assyria commanded, send there one of the priests whom you carried away from there, and let him go and dwell there, and teach them the law of the God of the land. So one of the priests whom they had carried away from Samaria came and lived in Bethel and taught them how they should fear the Lord. This is where you kind of get some of the animosity rising up within the Samaritans that you see in the Gospel of John. They don't like Samaritans. They don't care for them all that much. Well, this is kind of the roots of that. This is kind of the beginning of that anger and animosity that needs to be reconciled with them. These people rise up. They've been here for a while. After the king of Syria destroyed Israel, and now they say they want to help. They see them rebuilding Judah. They come down from Israel, and they see them rebuilding. They're coming from Samaria. All these people from various lands, and they've kind of formed their own community, formed their own nationality in a way. But they don't come just because they want to lend a helping hand. At least we can't gather that from Ezra chapter 4. Because as soon as they're told not to, or for some reason Zerubbabel and Jeshua the priest feel as though it's best not to have them help, because they feel as though this is what the Lord has commanded us. Excuse me. This is what the Lord has commanded us to do. And so something with their spirit is not settling right with having these people help this construction. Something impure within their motives or something. Not 100% for sure what's going on there. But it shows because Zerubbabel and Jeshua tell them, no, it's for us to do. Now they stir up trouble. Oh, well, you don't want us playing with you? Then, well, we'll just take the ball and go home then. We'll just do our own thing. And chapter 4 tends to get a little confusing to the reader today, because verse 6 breaks off into another form of opposition to rebuilding. So they've received several forms of opposition in this rebuilding. Maybe not always with the temple per se, because you have opposition of the temple here from those coming down from Samaria, and then the author transitions into rebuilding the city. If you notice that, it mentions nothing about the temple per se. It mentions about the city itself. Well, Ezra is mainly recording about the rebuilding of the cultic system, rebuilding about their religious faith, the temple, and the priesthood, and everything like that. Excuse me. It's mainly Nehemiah who gets into the structure of the city. But then you get into this rebuilding of the city, you get Asherus, you get Xerxes. So it gets a little confusing there. Verse 7 through 23 mentions another form of opposition in the days of Artaxerxes. So you have three forms of opposition, basically. You have verse 1 through 5 mention this event that's happening. Verse 6 breaks off into another form of opposition to rebuilding during the time of Xerxes. And verse 7 through 23 mentions another form of opposition during the time and reign of Artaxerxes. So you have three different forms here. The succession of Persian kings would possibly help us to get this aligned within a proper chronology. So you have Cyrus, Darius, Asherus, or also known as Xerxes, and then you have Artaxerxes. That's the succession that goes. That is the line of their timeline. Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, and Artaxerxes. If you're familiar with the book of Daniel, you'd be quite familiar with Cyrus and Darius, and if you're familiar with Esther, you'd be quite familiar with Artaxerxes. But why does the author do this? Just to confuse us, to try and trip us up? Maybe it's to show that this project has received multiple complaints and several forms of opposition. To show that this isn't the only time that they've received an opposing hand in their rebuilding. This isn't the only time that construction has had to stop. This has happened before for them. And as today's reader, I find this quite encouraging, because the people were only doing what they felt they were called to do. That's all they were doing. They weren't being disobedient. They weren't following their own wisdom. They weren't following their own way of the world. They were doing what God had called them, what they believed God had called them to do. And yet they still hit a brick wall. They still receive opposition from the world. Maybe this has happened to you. You felt strongly that God was calling you to do something. You take a risk. You do what needs to be done. And you're kind of in the stage where you're not too for sure, but if you had to make a percentage, it's more of 80 or 70 or maybe even 90%. This is what you feel as though God is calling you to do. God is stirring your heart. Been praying for a while, and this is what you do. And now that you've done this, you seem to hit nothing but opposition, nothing but wall after wall. While you're walking this path, you hit all kinds of pitfalls, all kinds of struggles, nothing but tribulation. And you begin to wonder if you misheard God. What is it? Maybe I must have just misheard him. Must have just been my own desire. Well, here is scriptural proof, a scriptural example of people's hearts being stirred to do something. They're being faithful, and yet they hit several obstacles. They receive hostility. All kinds of obstructions are in their way. I mean, Cyrus gave the contingency for them to go back. If God stirs your heart to go back, because Cyrus's heart has been stirred. And we're told by the author of Ezra that these people who came back, they only came back because God had stirred their hearts. God had stirred their hearts to relocate their lives, to their comfortability, to their own walls, to their own situation in life in which they have been accustomed to for 70 years. And they go back and they take this risk, they take this gamble, they take this huge opportunity to rebuild. And they even do these free will offerings. They give of themselves with their time and their resources and their efforts. And we have, according to Ezra, people that came faithfully because God stirred their hearts. And here they are, and they hit this giant wall, this opposition. Stop building. They don't receive this word from Cyrus. It's not like Cyrus has said, oh, I must have misheard God. My bad. So stop building and come back. This isn't from some other godly king or the priest, Jeshua or Zerubbabel or any of the people there that they said, I feel as though something's not right here. We've misheard. Something's wrong. God maybe did this to test us, to see what we would do. Maybe we should have stayed faithful, stayed right there in Babylon with Cyrus. He wasn't that bad of a king after all. But they receive all of this hostility, injustice, and oppression from evil people. That shows us that hostility or obstructions are not automatic signs that you misheard from God. And that is very encouraging to me. I hope that's very encouraging to you. And following after what you feel as though God has called you to do, and yet it seems as though there's such little fruit or there's such walls that you hit up against. That is not an automatic sign that you misheard from Him. In fact, sometimes it can be a sign that you heard correctly and that you are just called to persevere, to break through over that. That's hard to do while we're trying to be faithful. We have this, even though we know it's not true, we have this saying in the back of our mind that tells us if God calls us to do something and we're doing it, then it automatically has to just have this yellow brick path. It has to be this golden laid out journey for us, and everything is going to be smooth sailing. We know that's not true, but sometimes we keep it still in the back of our mind and thinking that's the way it must be. It wasn't. These people here were doing what they were called to do, and yet construction had to stop. Multiple times. We see that opposition 3 times just within this one chapter. And I think that's why the author compresses this much time. During these reign of several kings, he compresses it and shows us, see, this isn't the first time that they had to stop. This isn't the first time they've received oppression. Injustice has been happening. Galatians chapter 6, verse 9 tells us not to lose heart. Don't give up, for in due season we will reap fruit if we do not give up. 1 Corinthians tells us to be immovable, steadfast, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your work is never in vain. Continue to serve the Lord and continue to serve the saints. Don't give up when things get hard. We live in this false pretense. And we think that the righteous can never lose in this world. That maybe we get it from media or something. Storytelling that if we're doing what's right, then in our eyes we see ourselves as good people. Or someone else that we're living vicariously through as good people, and there's bad people who are doing wrong things to oppress that. And so we think that the good people always win in the end, and bad people always lose. It's not the way this world works, though, as I'm sure we've all experienced. The righteous lose in this world all the time. And yes, God will ultimately judge the wicked and sin, and he will eventually make all the wrong into right. But in this world, as we live it now, today, saints are treated badly all the time. The world is filled with corruption and oppression, and sadly, many of us we kind of get used to it. But from this event in Ezra, we also learn of the perseverance of God's people. They didn't quit. They keep on building. They keep on praying. They keep on believing God that he's going to do this. They don't throw their hands up in the air and call it quits. They keep going because that's all they could do. And that's what beat up saints do. When they hit a wall, they hope in God to tear down that wall until they come up against the next wall. And they're pretty sure another wall is going to come up after that wall falls down. And the Israelites are a great example of this as people who do not give up their hope. The very name Israel means that one that wrestles with God, coming from the event of Jacob wrestling with the Lord in Genesis chapter 32. When he's running from his brother Esau for his very life. And he wrestles with the Lord and he says, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. And his hip is touched and he has that lean that he has to walk according to all the rest of his life, that limp. And that's where that term comes from. His name, Jacob. It says right there, you shall be called Israel, for you are one who has wrestled with God. And all that time now, as they're referred to as Israelites, meaning one who wrestles with the Lord. We don't use that terminology so much today as we're talking about prayer, but it used to be used quite a bit. Isn't that the type of person that you want praying for you? The person who doesn't stop fighting until they're dead. And talking about the book of Ezra and the new temple and the rebuilding of the city, it's vital that we remember what was important for those people. What was mainly important for them was the worship, true worship of the one true God. That was vital to them, and that really seemed to be the only thing that mattered to them. That was what was important to them. Lastly, the principles that we consider here in Ezra 4 applies well in today's holiday. Ascension Day. From the world's perspective, that Jesus is not here, that he's gone, he's absent. But in the ascension, we remember that he's coming back. In the ascension, we know that he's currently in his priestly duty, in his priestly office, interceding for his people. From the viewpoint of the powers of darkness, it appears as though Jesus had been defeated and then he's gone today. Well, where is he? Well, he's in heaven interceding for his church. Back then, it looked as though evil had won. Today, we may get that perspective as well, that evil had indeed won back then, and evil wins today. But in the spiritual reality, God was defeating the curse of the fall and bringing life where there was death. As Christ was raised and ascended back to heaven, the world saw the victory of Jesus. In Hebrews 2, verse 8 tells us that we do not yet see all things in subjection to him. But not yet. But there will come a time in which we will. That includes all evil, all sin, all the effects of the curse. That while we're doing what we feel as though God has called us to do, and those walls come up, we are told to persevere through those walls until God brings those walls down, or until there is no more life in our lungs. We are never given the permission to just quit. Never. We're never given the permission to just throw in the towel, be done, this world's too hard, keeping the faith too hard, just roll over and die. We're never told that. We're always told, there's so many commands in the scriptures to persevere. Why are we told over and over again to persevere? Because in all reality, life as a Christian is hard. Life in this world is hard. Keeping the faith is hard and difficult. But we are told in the ascension of Christ that he intercedes for us. And what better advocate that we could possibly have than the Lord Jesus Christ?